Bueno, muy buenos días para todas las personas que se empiezan a unir a nuestra sesión informativa del día de hoy, 3 de febrero del 2025. Mucho gusto, mi nombre es Karen Martínez, profesional del equipo de Relaciones Internacionales y Consejería Académica de Colfuturo, y el día de hoy estamos muy bien acompañados todos con University College London, UCL, ubicada en Reino Unido. Les quiero contar un poquito cuál será el formato del presente webinar, y es que en la primera parte vamos a tener la compañía del profesor Peter Postl. Él es director del área de Economía en esta universidad y estará realizando una Masterclass titulada Economics in the Digital Age. Adicionalmente, nos está acompañando también Emma Paul Freeman. Ella es representante de esta institución académica y nos va a hablar de una gran variedad de temas relacionados con oferta académica, opciones de financiación, becas, hospedaje, ayudas y bueno, todas las recomendaciones que ella considere pertinentes para indicarle a todas las personas que están interesadas en empezar este proceso de proyecto académico y profesional. Entonces, como sabrán, todos estos webinars que estamos realizando con universidades de convenio se dan en el marco claramente, primero que todo, de nuestra convocatoria del 2025, pero adicionalmente se dan también en la línea de los webinars que tenemos con universidades que ofrecen becas del 100%. Entonces, Emma también más adelante nos va a profundizar un poco más esta información, pero en términos generales, para que todos lo tengamos en cuenta, UCL ofrece 2 becas del 100% para integrantes del programa de semillero de talentos y becas del 25% para todos los demás beneficiarios. Entonces, esta institución académica, como lo podemos ver, nos ofrece grandes beneficios, grandes ventajas y oportunidades. La idea es que presten total y suma atención a toda la información que ellos nos van a compartir y podamos colocar todas las inquietudes que tengamos al respecto en el cajón de Q&A, porque Emma y yo estaremos resolviéndolas a lo largo de la sesión. Entonces, ya sin más preámbulo, Emma, Peter, thank you so much for being here today with us. We are so happy to have you here, and you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you so much for your kind hospitality, and thank you for having me. Many apologies that this is in English rather than in Spanish, but I hope you'll, it'll be welcome nevertheless. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. My name is Peter Postl, and I am a professor in the economics department. I'm an economic theorist by training, but I am now the director of education overseeing our undergraduate and postgraduate programs. And it's in that role that I have recently thought a little bit more about the future of economics and how it interfaces with other disciplines, for example, computer science, data science, and so on. And so I'd like to give you a sort of taste of what I think the future direction of travel is and how economics as a discipline can help you set you up for this new data and artificial intelligence dominated world that we're heading into. So in the spirit of digitization, I thought I'll change the picture from the portico to this and give you a quick outline of what we are going to talk about today. First of all, I'd like to just give you a quick overview of what my take is on economics and what tools and insights we as economists traditionally have had and how that connects with econometrics and data science going forward. Now, first of all, economics, I guess in a nutshell, I describe as the science of choice because it looks at how individuals, be that companies, people like you and me, or governments make choices under constraints, because really only then is it a difficult problem and trade-offs have to be made. So when resources are limited, for instance, that's one reason why you might have to think carefully about what you do. Secondly, if your interests clash with those of other people's, you might have to be strategic in the way you behave, and thinking about that and the reactions of others to your decisions is also an important part of making conscious and careful choices. In addition to thinking about choices and trade-offs, economics has become a quantitative social science, which means that it's no longer defined primarily through its questions, but more the toolkit that you can apply to really anything in the social sciences and beyond, where that toolkit can give you meaningful insights. Now, when we talk about the traditional economics questions, what do we have in mind? One thing, for example, is the traditional question about how does price reflect the value of an object? Just to give you a sort of quick idea, In the late 90s, the British handbag designer Anya Hindmarsh created this canvas carrier, which was designed to get people off plastic bags and, proudly displays the "I'm not a plastic bag" logo. This went on sale in the New York store at $15 list price, but people queued around the block, and within 3 hours it was sold out, only to retail very quickly later on for $190 on eBay. So something that probably cost 2p to make and is not very expensive suddenly became desirable, and as a result fetched incredible prices. So here's a connection between price and value that seems startling. In fact, on Anya Hindmarsh's website, you can see the whole story with pictures of the queues around the block in New York when this bag went on sale. So that's one of the sort of traditional questions that we as economists can answer quite well through the interplay of supply and demand. But that's not the only thing that we care about and know things about now. Economics as a discipline goes beyond the financial markets pages in the FT or on Bloomberg. It's basically about, in the FT, you will find things like daily data releases. And if you're an economist in a bank, that would be typically the stuff you look at. But that is not all that economics is about. For example, in addition to the toolkits that allow you to deal with large data sets, we also have now, through game theory and other tools, a really good understanding conceptually of incentives and how to design institutions, by which I mean markets. For example, the eBay trading platform is built on insights from auction theory and economics, how international trade agreements work. All of those things are also part of what we do as economists. And so the interplay of data and tools, statistical tools, with understanding of how people behave and a conceptual view of the importance of the rules of the game, the institutions under which we interact, is what makes it a really powerful career tool for no matter what you're aiming for, be that a career in academia or in banking, consultancy, public policy, whatever. With the more recent development of techniques in computer science and larger computing power, artificial intelligence, and so on, we are increasingly now moving to a world where economics can touch upon the whole area of digitization and provide fruitful overlaps with areas like computer science. For instance, my own research area, mechanism design, is now done very well and comprehensively by colleagues in computer science who build real-life auctions. For example, not just eBay, but the way Google, for instance, auctions off the advertising space on its search engine for people who would like to have their products listed first in a search result. All those things are sold off through auctions that computer scientists design based on insights that came from economics. And similarly, machine learning and AI techniques allow econometricians to harness data sets that were beyond them in the past. Textual data, you can troll through company reports and extract verbal information and encode it in such a way that it can now be used in econometric analyses in ways that would have been very difficult to do before. And all of this has a positive impact, obviously, on career destinations. And already in 2019, this article from the Times of London talks about how Amazon and other tech companies are recruiting in large numbers economists, so many, in fact, that more economists work, PhD economists work at Amazon than in the whole economics faculty of Harvard University combined. So this is a sign that the tools of economics combined with computer science and AI tools are opening up career paths that weren't really traditional economics destinations before. So yeah, those are the two things I wanted to highlight to you. Hal Varian, if you are an undergrad economist who has written a seminal second-year microbook. He moved from academia to Google as their chief economist and has opened up a really staggering range of applications and tools to improve the way Google does its work. So, what are possible career destinations in the digital age for economists? Basically, all of those network internet trading platforms are potential sources of employment for graduates with an economics degree. And the article by Susan Athey and Michael Luca about the future and roles of economists in tech companies if you're interested. There are many other companies, of course, as well, in addition to the traditional career destinations. Now, when we just look briefly at what the economists do in those industries, let me just give you a quick overview. See, the new markets and technology platforms like eBay, but also things like Uber with their surge pricing, benefit from the tools and skills of economists, because the one thing we do well is to understand that there's a difference between correlation and causation. If you are, for example, launching an advertising campaign, you want to know what change in behavior this causes. You want to be able to say, if I spend this much money on an advertising campaign, does it lead to a behavioral change in the customers so that they buy my product more? You don't want just some spurious correlation. You want to be able to causally say that one thing leads to another. And that's something where economists over the last decades have developed really powerful toolkits. The next thing is the understanding of incentives and how you should design trading platforms and markets so people behave in ways that are in some ways desirable for the person designing that platform. For example, Uber's surge pricing for your ride during periods of high traffic or high demand is an example that shows that if people are willing to pay more during times of pay more. Understanding equilibrium effects is also really important, because while you might tinker with something in one area, it's important to understand that there might be knock-on effects on other markets or things that are unforeseen. And I think that's another thing where economics really primes you to be prepared to think beyond just the direct effect that you are studying. So, having given you an overview briefly of the sort of tools of economists and where more recently they have been gainfully employed, let me try and explain to you a little bit more how this actually works. So the starting point for economists typically is the observation of data or some real-world empirical regularity. And here's just one example. So if you're looking at data, which is here, the per capita GDP over the last 1,000 years in a number of countries, you can see for the first 800 years, almost nothing seemed to be happening. The GDP per capita was just constantly flat. And then suddenly, sort of in the 19th century, first in the UK, in Britain, a massive uptick. And then it follows in other countries, China, and so on. And you go, wow, what's going on? How did this suddenly happen? So this is the kind of empirical pattern that may pique your interest and lead to some formulation of a theory as to why that might be happening. I mean, here, by the way, the clue is the Industrial Revolution. And then once you have a theory of how this might work, to underpin it with data so that you can actually say something quantitatively about those effects. The problem about studying real-world empirical regularities is, of course, that the world around us is really, really complex. And so many things happen at once that you need to disentangle, that we have to find a way of homing in on what's important and leaving aside the things that are kind of noise. And here is a key difference. For us as economists, it's harder to run a lab experiment where you switch on and off certain factors. You know, for example, in physics, if you're interested in the gravitational force, you could say, let's drop a stone and measure how long it takes. And if we're worried about air friction, we can just do that in a vacuum. It's harder to do that in economics. And as a result, we typically do our analysis in models. However, the models need to be built based on careful judgments of what the key drivers are. Now, if this is abstract, I want to give you a kind of intuitive idea of what we mean by models and how both data and narrative come together into a... So, the thing about economic models is that they don't look as nice as the ones you see in other disciplines. So, for example, architects build very nice scale models of their buildings. You can see that car manufacturers will build models of their cars to fine-tune their design in the wind canal in order to reduce the air friction. Similarly, if you're building planes, as long as your plane is not flying at supersonic speed, you can build a small-scale model tested in a water canal, as is happening here in this picture, and the different colored things show you about turbulences which you're trying to reduce. And you can then scale everything up from this model to the real size of the aircraft and, generalize from those model insights. Finally, here's a model, again, that is really useful because no one in their right mind would crash cars with real human beings in it. And yet you want a model, namely the crash test dummy, that's close enough to a human being so that you can get a sense of the forces that a crash will exert on a passenger in a car. So all of these are models that you can physically build and touch. And economics is kind of similar, only that our models are typically not of the physical kind, but instead are simplified abstracts of the real world that try to highlight a particular issue at hand. Now, if that sounds abstract, let me give you an example. Imagine you are in London. This here is basically the closest to the real thing. This is a satellite image of Bloomsbury with University College London. If you're trying to find your way, let's say, to the Department of Economics here, you'd probably be better off with an abstraction, with a model of the real world in the form of a map. This map abstracts away all the colors and the different building heights because they're not relevant to the issue of finding your way to the Department of Economics here. So this is not the real world, but it is more useful than an image of the real world to get you to your destination. And that's basically what good economic models are. They are simplifications that home in on what matters and leave aside the stuff that's irrelevant. And to give you another example of this, without the mathematical concepts that we as economists typically use, I want to show you an example that goes back to Thomas Schelling, who won the Nobel Prize in economics. So this model has the following aim. It wants to show that socially undesirable outcomes can arise, even though there is no evil central planner who has designed it this way. So spontaneously, we get undesirable outcomes, even though nobody wants them. And to see that, think of the following model as a city. Take a chessboard and take red and blue counters. So these are little round playing pieces. Place them onto the chessboard. And now, in order to interpret this as a city, let's just randomly remove some of the counters to make available some free space. So now you've got a city, and each counter in a square here represents a household, and the empty spaces are locations to which you could move if you wanted to. Now, why would you want to move? The story goes as follows. So Schelling basically says, imagine that each of those households has mild preferences around if we say color of their neighbors. Let me do it in this following way. Imagine this is Manchester, and the red counters are Manchester United fans, while the blue counters are Manchester City fans. Suppose the Manchester United fans want at least half their neighbors to support the same team, while the Manchester City fans in blue want a third of their neighbors to support the same team. So, they want some kind of similarity in their neighborhood, but these preferences are probably not extreme. It's not like they say everyone needs to support the same team around me. And yet, if these households are surrounded by neighbors that don't correspond to their preference, meaning less than a half of the red neighbors are red or less than a third of the blue ones are blue, then they will move to a location where the neighborhood, for example, this household, taking their immediate neighborhood, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 neighbors, but of those 6, only 2 support the same team. So that's a third, although the household wants at least half their neighbors to support Manchester United. So picking up this counter and moving it to a new location, you'll see that now in this new place, the neighbors of the neighbors support the same team. Continue this with any other random stone. It doesn't matter where you start. Looking at the neighborhoods, picking them up when they're not happy with their surrounding, you will inevitably end up with a pattern where the city is completely segregated. So a chain reaction is kicked off that results in essentially a city of ghettos. Either you have, only Manchester United fans around you, or then a large area like here with only Manchester City fans. And so despite mild preferences and no central planning, individual decision-making can sometimes lead you to patterns like this, which if you're a city planner, and now instead of thinking about football teams, imagine these are rich and poor households, you suddenly end up with expensive, rich neighborhoods and poorer regions in between, when really, ideally, you would like a much more level and, diverse city. So understanding how individual behavior can lead to these undesirable outcomes is quite an important insight. And, it can help you with city planning, but also it was captured in a way that I thought was interesting when, after the financial crisis in 2008, the British Parliament had done hundreds of interviews with CEOs and came out with a report saying the financial crisis is not the fault of any individual banker or bank, but collectively the finance industry has brought it about. So no one has done something individually egregious, but collectively somehow we ended up with this terrible outcome. And that's why it's important to understand individual behavior and how in aggregate it can lead to undesirable outcomes. Now, given that I've talked nonstop at you for a little while, I'd like to give you the opportunity to sort of play a little game with me around the question of incentives. So hopefully you're ready to type something into the chat in a sec when I ask you to. It's not going to take long, and it doesn't matter whether you get anything right or not. The question I'd like to ask you is to imagine for a sec that you are an investor with £100 and that you have two investment objects at your disposal. Project A, which is just going to give you a standard 5% return on your investment. Alternatively, you have another asset, Project B, that is a little bit more nuanced. So it pays a 10% return on the total investment across all 5 participants in our little game here. That 10% dividend is then divided equally across the 5 people. So for instance, if collectively you guys invest £200, that makes a £20 return, 10% of that, which we then split across the 5 of you. So each of you gets a fifth of 20 quid, which is £4. So basically the question I'd like to ask you, and basically the first 5 people who respond, I'm going to take their numbers. Please tell me if you can split these £100 in any way you want between A and B. How much would you put into Project A? How much into Project B? All right, so I'd ask you to just basically take a minute or so to think about it and then type into the chat. You just need to tell me how much goes into A. I will correctly deduct that from your £100 and put the rest into B. So if you could have a quick think about what you'd like to do, I will open the chat and have a look what's coming through. Ideally, I'd like 5 of you to send me an amount of money that they'd like to place into Project A, and I'll then have a look at what comes out. So please go ahead and don't be shy. Just send me a number. I need 5. Is there anything I can do to explain? Anyone who's willing to send me in a number? Let's see. Then maybe ask you potentially just to check in if people are willing to participate by sending me a kind of investment split of these £100.
Sí, claro que sí. Bueno, a todas las personas que están aquí en la sesión, los invitamos a que realicen como este ejercicio que Peter en este caso nos está presentando en pantalla. Entonces, a través del cajón de Q&A o del chat, nos pueden contar como cuál sería la respuesta que le pondrían al proyecto A y B. John nos dice el chat está deshabilitado. John, si quieres, si puedes, lo puedes colocar aquí a través del Q&A y yo se lo leo a Peter. ¿Listo? Entonces, give me a second, Peter. People is writing now in the Q&A.
Cool.
Bueno, Peter. Peter, Sarah.
Thank you. So I've got one.
Yeah. Sarah says, I would invest 70 in Project A and 13 in Project B.
Cool. Are there 4 more people who are willing to send me in their figures? Because then we can Because ideally I'd like 5 people to tell me how they'd like to split their money. So imagine each of you has £100.
Yeah, perfect.
Let me see
A
if we
ver, a
get
todas las
some
personas
money.
los invitamos a animarse a poner sus respuestas a través del Q&A. Peter quiere más o menos 5 respuestas como para tener una idea general y poder dar la respuesta acertada. Entonces los esperamos en el Q&A, los estamos esperando sus respuestas.
See. Cool. Now we've got a second one at 60 and another 60. Right. 2 more brave people. Another 60. Cool. Thank you. Okay, cool. I've got these numbers and I will now go back to the slides 1 sec and show you the results. Okay, so what I will do, you can still see what I'm doing. Just by typing them in, you will see the numbers shift because, okay, so we had, okay, we go 70, the next one is 60, 60, 60, and 100.
Yeah, 100.
Yeah.
If you want to have like a different kind of answers, maybe.
I think this is good. So I've
Okay.
got 5 of them now, and the cool thing is, can you see the slides, by the way?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Cool. So the cool thing is now we've got here 5 numbers, and especially number 5 here with the £100 investment in A is something useful to have. So basically, you can see at the bottom of the slide already that I've calculated something called the free rider index. And you might already get a sense that free riding doesn't sound like a particularly nice thing to do. So let me explain. The free rider index is nothing but looking at the proportion of total money, namely £500, that's been invested in project A. So it's basically 350 over 500 that gives rise to this free rider index. So what does this mean? So basically what you've done here by investing in project A, especially person 5, you've basically benefited at the expense of all those people who have made a contribution to project B, which is something that economists call free riding. Because you see, economics basically has this class of goods called public goods, which include things like public parks, national defense, roads, but also vaccinations. Those things you can benefit from even if you've not made a financial contribution to them. And the thing that's tragic about public goods is that typically if you ask people to make contributions voluntarily for something that they can use without making a contribution, they're not going to typically make those. It basically requires either tax funding or, a vaccination mandate where everyone has to do COVID vaccination or whatever, because otherwise people just will not do it because they think somebody else is going to do it. Now, the point is that being a free rider doesn't sound very collective, but it is actually the rational thing to do in this environment. Because just to explain it here, if you invested all your money in project A as an individual, you end up with 105 no matter what the others do. If you somehow coordinated with all 5 people and agreed to invest everything in B, you are all going to be better off getting £110 individually. The problem is that any one of you has an incentive to deviate away from the agreement and direct their money into project A instead, because at that point you get 113, assuming the others have all stuck with putting all their money into project B. So basically, if you know that your contribution to B is incentivizing others to free ride, you might as well not bother and put everything into A as well. And so as a result, public goods tend to be not provided, or at least under-provided, unless we recognize this free rider problem and build institutions that force people to make the kind of investments that we think are socially desirable. So for example, public goods might be provided through general taxation like theaters or parks. But also if you think about a vaccination, the reason why that's a public good is the following. If you want to protect a country against a particular disease from an epidemiological standpoint, typically you don't have to vaccinate 100% of the population. Like with COVID, herd immunity already kicked in around, I don't know, 88 or 90%. But if you say to people, look, 10% of you don't have to worry about vaccination and the potential side effects, then everyone will go, oh, you know what, somebody else is going to do it, and therefore I'm fine, let them have the side effects. And then as a result, nobody, the whole society is exposed. Okay, so that's basically one of the key lessons from economics about how designing carefully the institutions and incentives that we interact under allows you to potentially guard against undesirable outcomes, even though they're the rational thing individually to do. Okay, so having talked about economics and what you learn conceptually about it, let me now move to the sort of data science world. And there, a branch of economics that has come from statistics was basically termed econometrics in 1924 and designed to give empirical content to the kind of economic relationships that our models postulate. And the term's been around since the 1920s, while data science is a much newer invention going back to 1974. Now, from that angle, we could say econometrics is the original data science. And it's no surprise that I would argue if you want to be a data scientist, economics is the subject to choose. And hopefully what I'll present in the remainder of my time will convince you. Now, econometricians typically try to test hypotheses. If one thing goes up, something else might go down. Is that true? By how much? And the idea is that an understanding of those things will help inform public policy. If you put a tax on cigarettes, what will it do to the number of packets sold? Will it really improve public health if people buy fewer packets of cigarettes, and so on? Those are the kind of things that a government might want to understand. Data science, in contrast, the more recent discipline, is essentially built to extract patterns from data, and often from unstructured data, be that text, pictures, and other things. So that's where it's been particularly powerful. And its tools were mainly machine learning algorithms, data visualization, but also big data stuff, data mining. The cool thing about it is that it allows you to bring out hidden patterns and train accurate prediction models, even though the interpretability of the model itself is often lost in the process. So that's where the interface and the combination of econometrics and data science comes in and is potentially quite powerful. So econometricians have benefited from data science through the ability to automate and scale up tasks that were previously beyond us. Economists have in turn been able to bring tools that allow you to estimate causal relationships, saying X causally affects Y. And on top of that, statisticians and computer scientists have also helped us to keep track of how uncertainty is modeled and everything else. So basically, economics, I would argue, isn't just one element of data science, but is the bit that actually elevates it to a level where you can not just predict things, but you can also say what things mean, especially when it comes to making informed public policy. So, but understanding why things have happened, that's the key thing that economics will give you. And so that's why I think economics and a good training there, combined with machine learning, is what will truly empower you to move beyond just prediction correlation. I mean, in the interest of time, I realize that I won't be able to go through both of the examples that I have prepared, but I'll show you one of them in a sec. So econometricians and their focus on causality is, I think, the key thing, but drawing on machine learning tools to bring in new sources of data, text, pictures, and whatever, is what's going to bring the real power out in the combined discipline. Now, I'll jump across those slides to the next example, because I think that gives you a nice idea of the different approaches of data science versus econometrics, just so that you understand what I mean. So think about this following example here. Suppose you're interested in predicting the impact of age on the earning or wage of an individual. And you're doing this by looking at a data set like this one here in the picture, where we take income data for men from the Central Atlantic region in the US, and we plot their age on the horizontal axis and their wages on the vertical axis. You can see that it's quite a scattered plot, but that the relationship is kind of, kind of inverse parabolic kind of shape. So basically, wages increase and then they begin to decline. Now, you could use this curve to try and predict the wage of an individual when they tell you how old they are. The problem is that when you look at this figure, there's so much spread around the purple line that it's clear that age alone is not going to be a massively accurate predictor of a man's wage. So let's look at some other variables as well that could play a role. And if you look at the middle picture here, you see time has a slight role. So over the period 2003 to 2009, average wages have grown by about $10,000. So time seems to play a role. Education, as the right-hand picture shows, also plays a role. If you look at different educational levels, 1 meaning no high school to 5 PhD level training, you can see that the average wage, the horizontal black line in these colored boxes, is kind of ascending, saying that the average wage goes up with education level. So if you are trying to predict wages, taking age, time, and education into account is likely to give you a decent stab at this problem. But the question is, how do you model this, especially taking into account the fact that the age-wage relationship seems to be non-linear. So because of the non-linearity, if you're a machine learner and you want to predict wages, you might say, okay, there should be polynomial terms, age squared, age to the power of 3. All those polynomial terms will allow you to fine-tune your estimated curve, also taking into account, obviously, time. And you basically run statistical analyses trying to estimate the parameters alpha 1, alpha 2, and so on, and then fine-tune this model until it gives you the best possible wage prediction that you can get. What these parameters mean, though, the machine learners don't really care about. This is where econometricians come in. They will be very careful in justifying the inclusion of each variable, especially the higher polynomial terms. Now, age squared, an econometrician will also include, simply because it's perfectly intuitive that when you're young, your wage will increase with age. You get more experienced, and therefore people promote you, pay you more. But eventually you get to a plateau, and then your wages begin to decline. Maybe you start working part-time when you're older to enjoy your life a bit more. So age squared makes sense. Age to the power of 3 is difficult to explain economically, because if you were to plot a function where age is cubed, it would basically mean that after plateauing and falling for a while, wages suddenly pick up again when you're even older. And, sadly, as I'm getting older, I think it's not going to happen that when I get 80, my wages will suddenly, soar to the sky. So age to the 3 is unlikely to have an economic meaning, and that's why it will not be included in the equation estimated by the econometrician. And so you can see here that specific modeling decisions depend on whether you just care about the prediction, or whether you also want to have a model where each of the parameters that you estimate has a meaning and may potentially be the object of government policy in order to, achieve certain goals. So that's where being a data scientist with econometric skills, or an econometrician with access to a data science toolkit, is really helpful, because you have the economics training and ensure that the interpretability of your model is maintained. And at the same time, you're able to draw on these big data tools and unstructured data tools from data science that allow you to bring in extra information that was previously beyond our reach, because the traditional statistics from the government statistics bodies didn't include stuff about verbal descriptions from company reports and so on. So that's where I would argue those two things are essentially complements, and that the direction of economics is to increasingly build in opportunities to acquire those skills, so that you come out as a well-rounded data scientist that can do both of the things: interpretable models and a flexible toolkit that opens up the opportunity to work with a wide range of variables. So if this whistle-stop tour to economics, incentives, and the statistical tools at our disposal sounds interesting to you, may I just briefly flag up that all our programs in this department at the master's level, and there are 2 of them, will essentially try and focus on improving data extraction so that better and more informed policy making and research are possible. And so technical skills to deal with those data sets, as well as the substantive knowledge about incentives and economic theory together, is what we try to convey. And we do that, oh, by the way, this is a little joke that I put in here. The reason I put it in is because I'm obviously talking about economics and the programs at UCL and how they are helpful for anyone's career. The example is my own career. I was a master's student here in the 90s. And in addition to learning that time is not always kind on your hairline, I'd like to also flag this up to show that the training here at UCL has set me up for a career that, I didn't dream was possible in quite the way it turned out. So that's just to say, I'm not just someone who works here, but I've benefited from the experience in the past and feel that I can also speak as an alumnus. So back to what we do have on offer. This is the MSc Economics program I did in the late 90s. And, it provides you both with core training at an advanced level in all the key areas of economics, plus a range of options. And especially the data science tools that I've mentioned in my talk so far are increasingly prominent amongst our optional modules. But we also have another program called Data Science and Public Policy, which is directly aimed at harnessing these modern data tools for government and public policy organizations. Because, the Googles and Amazons of this world are obviously using all of this. They have a lot of money, huge computing power, and harnessing this not just for the big corporates, but also in government organizations, in NGOs and elsewhere is an important opportunity for better decision making. And that's what this program sets you up for, with the tools and options delivered both by the econ department and our partner in political science. So if you want something more policy oriented, this is the program for you. If you have any questions in the interest of time, I can direct you to our website where all of those programs are explained in a little bit more time to answer questions. But at 4, I will have to be at a lecture. So I will stop here, and I'll thank you for your patience and time. And hope to welcome you to London. Thank you. Right. Any questions?
In the chat, actually, Professor. Fascinating talk, and what, a kind of taster session, and a professor at UCL. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have answered.
Cool. There's one in English. A few questions I can see. There are none unanswered. You've been very productive. Thank you.
We've had some good
questions. Are
questions.
there any questions you'd like to flag?
I did notice one about from a candidate who was interested in both economics and engineering. I don't know if you would suggest a particular program, or I know that there are no specific combinations in economics, but there are lots to choose from as well.
I mean, one thing I might say here is that traditionally in the UK, schools of management have grown out of engineering schools because of operations research, and that is also the case at UCL. So our School of Management actually falls under the Faculty of Engineering, and they have recently launched a Master's MSc Finance and Data Science. So that would be an example where you have computer science and finance and economics kind of come together. The MSc Finance is a co-production between economics and finance. So my colleagues have some input there. So that might be one area where engineering, interpreted in the sort of sense of computer science, combined with finance, might be a fruitful option for the student. So
I think I'll go ahead and try and share my screen first of all to.
Thank you. So I may have to head off in a sec to a lecture. But what I'll say is, if anyone has questions to me in particular, either through Emma or directly to my email address, please don't be shy and let me know. And I'm very happy to to help or give you individual advice based on your background and circumstances. So I'll just quickly say thank you and head off to the next lecture, but thank you so much for your interest and hopefully welcome you to London.
Peter, thank you. Thank you so much. Nice to meet
Thank you,
you.
Karen, so much.
And I hope to see you in the next opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Hola, Karen.
Emma.
Gracias. ¿Están viendo la pantalla con Welcome to UCL?
No, Emma, no estamos viendo tu
No.
pantalla todavía.
Voy a intentar compartir la pantalla nuevamente para ver. ¿Ahora sí?
No, todavía no la
No.
veo.
Ah, es que no.
Ahora sí, estás empezando a compartir.
Ahora sí.
Sí.
Ok, perfecto, gracias. Entonces, voy a seguir en español, pero las pantallas, diapositivas, la presentación está en inglés. Ojalá, ojalá sirva así con esa combinación. Gracias nuevamente al profesor Postl. Ya han experimentado una clase de UCL, esa gran oportunidad de uno de nuestros profesores reconocidos. Buenos días nuevamente, mi nombre es Emma, soy la representante para Candidatos de Colombia. Gracias por acompañarnos a Colfuturo por esa oportunidad. Voy a brindarles más información dentro de los próximos 10 minutos y cualquier pregunta que tengan al final me pueden escribir directamente también y podemos agendar una cita por Teams también con mucho gusto. Entonces voy a repasar información sobre los áreas de estudio, por qué elegir con nosotros, qué se ofrece en UCL. Aquí hay un pequeño resumen. Me imagino que están pendientes de la reputación de UCL y el ranking. Tenemos muchos años de ser calificado entre las mejores 10 universidades del mundo. Hay muchas oportunidades, una gran variedad de programas que se ofrecen en UCL y oportunidades de becas y más. Entonces voy a brindarles esa información en los próximos 10 minutos. Atrae más de 50,000 estudiantes aquí en UCL, de más de 150 países. Es muy multicultural. Londres es una ciudad espectacular, multicultural, muy cosmopolitana también, entonces van a sentirse como Londoner dentro de muy poco tiempo. Pero la universidad ofrece más de 650 programas de maestría. Tenemos 11 facultades y voy a darles un poco más de información sobre las facultades y la variedad de programas también. Pero realmente es un ambiente muy especial. Aunque haya tantos estudiantes, es una comunidad muy unida dentro de un lugar muy especial y muy verde de la ciudad también. Y hay más de 400 asociaciones estudiantiles de los cuales se puede aprovechar como estudiante también. Aquí aparece en la lista de las mejores 10 universidades del mundo. Como se ven en la imagen, es Houses of Parliament, aquí al lado del río Thames. Es un edificio espectacular también. Y UCL también tiene una reputación de inclusividad y diversidad. Y es gracias a este señor que era un filósofo que se llama Sir Jeremy Bentham, de esa época, ¿verdad? Se fundó en 1826. Y él dio mucha influencia al ethos, los valores de la universidad. Él creó en la educación para todos y gracias a él, UCL fue la primera universidad de Inglaterra dar la bienvenida a mujeres y a estudiantes de cualquier religión y clase social. Y ojalá estén con nosotros para celebrar nuestro bicentenario en el 2026 también. Nuestra reputación es global y tenemos muchos años de hacer avances en muchas áreas de investigación, asumiendo a los desafíos más difíciles del mundo. Entre algunos está el entendimiento cultural, el bienestar humano, justicia y igualdad, el cambio climático y, claro, todas esas áreas se requieren un abordaje multidisciplinar y es muy integrado en la universidad. Tenemos políticos, científicos políticos trabajando con geógrafos, arquitectos trabajando con ingenieros para abordar la crisis climática, por ejemplo. Y los profesores y la investigación de UCL aparece regularmente, cada semana de hecho, en la prensa mundial. Entonces los profesores aparecen en los periódicos, se escuchan en la radio, en entrevistas, es muy interesante. Nos sentimos muy orgullosos de trabajar aquí también por esa razón. Ese es nuestro campus en Bloomsbury. Como mencionaba antes, es un lugar muy verde en el centro de Londres. Está ubicado en el corazón de Londres, está rodeado de museos, de bibliotecas. UCL tiene su propio teatro, su gimnasio, varias bibliotecas, sociedades estudiantiles que mencionaba antes, y se conoce como el Knowledge Quarter, y es un consorcio de unos 90 centros culturales y académicos, y algunos son parte de la misma universidad. Em, Se ven en la pantalla, en la imagen, Houses of Parliament, queda unos 50 minutos caminando, o también se puede subir el bus, em, por cualquier transporte que prefiera, pero todo está más o menos cerca, en esa área también. Las estaciones principales de Londres, algunas están a unos 10 minutos caminando también. King's Cross, St. Pancras, se puede ir a París de aquí, y la estación de Euston también. Entonces puede pasar un fin de semana largo, un día en París, en cualquier momento también. Y UCL tiene otro campus, es igual de espectacular, con facilidades de vanguardia. Está al lado del Parque Olímpico. Tuvimos las Olimpiadas en el 2012, y está al lado del estadio de West Ham para cualquier aficionado de fútbol. También es un centro cultural aquí, y de lo cual UCL fue miembro fundador. Y aquí se enseñan varios programas de ingeniería, robótica, artes creativas, y están muy cerca del centro financiero. Y de hecho, el School of Management de la Universidad de UCL está ubicado en el piso 50 de Canary Wharf, y es la mejor vista que se pueda tener de Londres. De ahí visité por primera vez hace 2 semanas, y es impresionante. Y están ampliando también el espacio del School of Management ahí. Aquí están las 11 facultades que mencionaba antes. Hay una gran variedad de programas. Mencioné antes también que ofrecemos más de 650 programas. Nosotros podemos ofrecer apoyo y ayuda con cualquier pregunta que tengan de la universidad. No somos especialistas en los programas, son los mismos profesores, por ejemplo, el doctor Postl, y cada programa, cada departamento tiene su propio equipo de admisiones, y pueden contar con ellos también para responder a cualquier pregunta, y en eso puedo ayudar yo también para darle seguimiento. Vamos a ver, más de 10 de esos áreas de estudios están clasificados entre las mejores 10 del mundo también, según el ranking del QS. Por ejemplo, arquitectura, arqueología, geografía, anatomía, farmacia, psicología, etcétera. Y los módulos están diseñados por expertos tales como el profesor Postl, en el área de estudio. Ellos mismos diseñan los módulos de los programas también. Entonces vale la pena revisar cada página de cada programa, y ahí aparecen los requisitos del programa, el contenido del curso, todos los módulos del programa, etc. Entonces, ese es un pequeño resumen de los próximos pasitos para aplicar para su maestría. Las aplicaciones para todos los programas de maestría abren en octubre. Es bien sencillo. Todo se hace por una plataforma que se llama Pórtico, y ahí se puede subir los documentos y todos los requisitos, los documentos requeridos para todos los programas. Los programas sí son competitivos y es un desafío ser aceptado, pero es manejable también. Entonces, la cuota de aplicación normalmente son 90 libras esterlinas. Para algunos de los programas de la Escuela de Negocios, School of Management, puede variar hasta 160 libras esterlinas. Voy a mencionar los requisitos y los equivalentes ahora en la próxima diapositiva. Mencionaba los certificados, entonces esos siempre son requisitos de la aplicación, y es después de recibir, por ejemplo, la cuota de aplicación y los certificados que se revisan las aplicaciones. Entonces, el historial de notas, el titulado, los requisitos de inglés, aunque todavía se puede aplicar sin el certificado de inglés, por ejemplo, y hacer su examen después para cumplir ese requisito varios meses después. El personal statement, carta de motivación, es otra parte muy importante de la aplicación. En esa carta se menciona sus motivaciones por querer hacer el curso, por qué en UCL, la experiencia que también puede brindar al curso, qué quieres hacer a largo plazo. Y los académicos y los departamentos escogen los estudiantes em, que obviamente cumplan con los requisitos, pero también que sean los que tengan la experiencia específica para el curso también. A veces hay otros requisitos tales como GRE, portafolios, currículum, y todos esos requisitos están en la página de cada programa y varía de cada programa. Entonces, como mencionaba, vale la pena, les sugiero que revisen muy bien los requisitos específicos del programa que le interese. Normalmente el requisito es mínimo una referencia, normalmente una referencia académica, o dependiendo del programa, 2 referencias, una académica, otra referencia profesional. También se puede verificar en cada programa también. El departamento, el equipo de admisiones de cada departamento revisa la aplicación y ojalá recibe el conditional or unconditional offer. Si es condicional, puede depender de cumplir con el requisito de inglés, o de subir su historial de notas, o subir el titulado, el certificado final del curso también. Vale mencionar también que cada programa, cada facultad o departamento ofrece sesiones virtuales. Vale la pena aprovechar de esos. ¿Ustedes han experimentado una sesión virtual hoy? Un ejemplo de estas sesiones que ofrecen cada departamento también, y son muy buenas oportunidades para hacer sus preguntas a los mismos profesores del departamento también. Entonces, es un resumen de los requisitos. Normalmente para la mayoría de las maestrías en UCL, el requisito es un 2-1, el equivalente es un 4/5 de promedio de una licenciatura o un título profesional en Colombia. Para algunos de los programas también piden un 2-2, lo que es un 2-2, un 3.5/5. Y también es muy importante verificar los requisitos dependiendo del área de estudio, porque, por ejemplo, economía uno de los requisitos va a ser una licenciatura, por ejemplo, en economía y el mismo área de estudio. ATAS depende del programa, pero algunos programas, por ejemplo, piden un ATAS. Eso puede durar unos 6 meses. También cuando reciba su oferta, em, el departamento le va a decir si se necesita ese certificado de ATAS. Y son ejemplos de los requisitos de inglés. Por ejemplo, en economía se requiere un Level 2. El equivalente en IELTS es un 7, no menos de 6.5 en cada elemento. Varía dependiendo del programa, pero normalmente es un 7, un Level 2 es el promedio de un IELTS. Y claro, se ofrecen varias oportunidades de becas por medio de ese convenio que valoramos mucho para darles la bienvenida a estudiantes de Colombia. Em, la beca que se ofrece por medio de ese convenio es un 25% de la colegiatura, según el programa Crédito Beca. Y para el otro programa que se llama Semillero de Talentos, UCL ofrecen 2 becas completas de 100% de la colegiatura para 2 candidatos. Entonces vale la pena verificar esa información también con el equipo de Colfuturo, pero damos la bienvenida a muchos estudiantes de Colombia cada año y son muy activos, son muy sociales y participan mucho en la comunidad estudiantil en UCL también. Quería mencionar también la otra oportunidad de beca de la misma universidad. Es una beca que se llama Global Master Scholarship de 15,000 libras esterlinas, y esos son para estudiantes con necesidades económicas. No tiene que ver con su promedio, su nota final, tiene que ver con sus circunstancias económicas, digamos. Entonces, hay un formulario que se llena en línea, y hay un guía también que aparece en esas mismas páginas para guiarles por el proceso de aplicación. En la fecha límite aparece esa beca, es el 8 de mayo de ese año, y ahí está el enlace para esa beca. Como mencionaba antes, damos la bienvenida a muchos estudiantes de Colombia. Estudian una gran variedad de programas también por medio del programa Colfuturo, educación, ingeniería, economía, arquitectura, por ejemplo, y hay muchos graduados de Colombia también. Entonces, podemos ponerles en contacto con esa comunidad. Vale la pena aprovechar de ese networking, esas oportunidades de networking también. Y la universidad ofrece alojamiento. Es un pequeño resumen de un ejemplo de los costos. Puede variar, puedes escoger alojamiento de la universidad viviendo en zona 1, lo que es una ventaja porque están en el centro de Londres, donde está la universidad. O hay otras opciones de alojamiento que se puede compartir con otros estudiantes de, por ejemplo, Queens, Queen Mary, LSE, King's. Entonces hay estudiantes de todas las universidades de Londres también. O hay otras oportunidades, opciones de alojamiento privado también. La Unión de Estudiantes ofrece webinars, sesiones de consejo para darles consejos en la búsqueda de alojamiento privado, y también las asociaciones estudiantiles, incluyendo el Colombian Society, ofrecen sesiones también para ayudarles y guiarles un poco en cuanto a esas búsquedas también. Queremos que se disfruten mucho de su experiencia, no tanto en la universidad como en Londres también. Y hay muchas oportunidades en la Unión de Estudiantes para hacer voluntariados, em, para participar en deportes, en asociaciones culturales, etcétera. Entonces van a sentirse en casa y va a conocer gente de todo el mundo en UCL. Y aquí hay una un ejemplo de solo algunas de las asociaciones que se ofrecen aquí en UCL. Y claro, se ofrecen muchas oportunidades de desarrollo profesional y personal también, y además de poder trabajar, puedan aprovechar de los eventos que organice la universidad, ferias de carrera para conectarse con empleadores, charlas de expertos, networking, y hay varias plataformas que se puede utilizar para subir sus datos y conectarse con empleadores también. Pero hay ferias de carrera cada año en UCL, dan la bienvenida a más de 1000 compañías, representantes de varias compañías, y hay oportunidades enfocados, por ejemplo, en el emprendimiento. Hay un centro que se llama Hatcheries, King's Cross, es una facilidad de UCL, y aquí se puede aprovechar de talleres, de cursos de formación, oportunidades de hacer networking con inversores y acceder a convocatorias para financiación. Y aparecen regularmente en LinkedIn, por ejemplo, todos los proyectos exitosos, y a veces esos proyectos son de miles de libras esterlinas también. Entonces vale la pena hacerle follow en nuestra página o en LinkedIn, los canales de noticias también. Esos son solo algunos de los empleadores, hay muchísimos más, pero son algunos de las compañías que emplean a los graduados de UCL. Y finalmente, pero no menos importante, quería asegurarles que la universidad tiene muchos equipos para apoyar a los estudiantes a todos los niveles, igual los estudiantes de posgrado. em, Entendemos que son miles de kilómetros de sus casas, de sus familiares, em, no importa la edad. Entonces, hay una amplia gama de servicios de bienestar, tanto de los departamentos y de los equipos centrales y de los mismos estudiantes y la unión de estudiantes también para ayudarles a orientarse y a sentirse en casa, ¿verdad? Hay un equipo dedicado a los estudiantes internacionales, y son ellos también que les apoyan con un programa de orientación y invitan hasta lamas para terapia animal durante periodos de exámenes también. Pero hay ese asesoramiento profesional psicológico, se registra con la clínica, entonces su bienestar es sumamente importante para nosotros y solo hay que indicarlo si necesitan algo. Queremos que se sientan en casa en UCL y en Londres. Y para cualquier otra pregunta que tengan después de hoy, si quisieran agendar una sesión por Teams, una cita por Teams, estoy con mucho gusto, estoy a la orden. Es mi nombre, mi correo electrónico, me pueden escribir directamente. También me han escrito algunos candidatos en el chat con preguntas muy específicas, entonces cuenten conmigo para darle seguimiento con los departamentos también. Y para mencionar nuevamente, muy rápidamente, para cualquier pregunta específica sobre el curso o los módulos, es mejor, más recomendable hablar con el mismo equipo de admisiones sobre los módulos, son los especialistas en el área de estudio, ¿verdad? Pero para cualquier otra pregunta, cualquier otra ayuda que necesiten, estoy a la orden también. Muchísimas gracias por su paciencia y por su tiempo, y a Colfuturo, a Karen y todo el equipo para esa gran oportunidad.
No, Emma, gracias a ti de verdad por tu presentación, por el tiempo también que invirtieron en esta excelente sesión informativa. Entonces, si te parece, ya para finalizar, he filtrado como algunas de las preguntas quizás más recurrentes. De igual forma, Emma ya nos colocó en pantalla su correo electrónico. La invitación es a que nos contactemos directamente con ella si hay preguntas muy específicas de un caso muy puntual. Entonces, bien, por aquí he visto muchas preguntas de más o menos cuánto tarda UCL en dar respuesta sobre el proceso de admisión.
Buena pregunta, es una buena pregunta. Y a veces varía dependiendo del periodo de aplicación. Puede durar entre 6 y 8 semanas para recibir su carta de oferta, su decisión, digamos. Por eso vale la pena aplicar lo más antes posible, antes de que la universidad reciba más miles de aplicaciones también.
Perfecto. Bueno, y de acuerdo con eso, Iván nos preguntaba, si aplico estos primeros días de febrero, entonces más o menos aplicaría esa regla de las 8 semanas que mencionas.
Claro que sí, sí,
Ujú.
normalmente sí.
Perfecto.
Es una buena
Listo.
época para aplicar.
Ujú. Súper, Emma, gracias. Bueno, también una pregunta muy importante de acuerdo a nuestro convenio. Se tiene claro que son 2 becas del 100% que ustedes ofrecen para pertenecientes del semillero de talentos. Si por algún motivo fueran más la lista de personas seleccionadas que aplicarían para este beneficio, ¿en qué se basaría UCL para elegir y determinar a qué 2 personas específicamente se les brindará la beca?
Sí, no, me pregunto si entendí muy bien la pregunta. Si hay 2 o 3 candidatos, por ejemplo, que cumplan con
Exacto.
los requisitos.
Ujú.
Sí, es una buena pregunta. Y obviamente confiamos con el proceso de Colfuturo también, dependiendo de los elegidos, de los candidatos elegidos. Pero en eso puede depender mucho del compromiso, de la motivación por querer hacer el curso, si han, em, por ejemplo, si hayan hecho su investigación, una investigación profunda del curso, de la carrera, em, y del impacto que quieran hacer, por ejemplo, eso también puede influenciar la decisión. Pero todos
Perfecto. Bien.
son candidatos excelentes, es muy
Ujú.
difícil la
Sí.
decisión.
Perfecto. Bueno, aquí una pregunta. ¿Con el pago se pueden aplicar a 2 carreras o solo es válido para un programa?
Solo es válido para un programa. Sí se puede aplicar a 2 programas máximo para programas de maestría, pero son 2 cuotas de aplicación.
Perfecto. Bien, respecto al idioma, si la persona todavía no tiene certificado que UCL exige, ¿podría aplicar y recibir una carta condicional?
Puede ser, sí, puede ser. Con mucho gusto pueden aplicar y entendemos que muchos todavía están en el proceso de mejorar su inglés o hacer los próximos pasos para organizar los exámenes, etcétera. Entonces, sí pueden aplicar sin el certificado final de inglés y subir para cumplir ese requisito después, subir el certificado. Y se me olvidó mencionar antes que aceptamos varios, varias calificaciones, various English qualifications,
Ujú.
no solo el IELTS, sino el TOEFL, y hay una lista en cada página de cada programa. Se puede escoger International Students. Después hay una lista de países, se puede escoger Colombia. Eso le da el requisito, el mínimo de promedio. Y el English, también hay otro enlace que se lleva a otra página que da la lista de todos los requisitos. Por ejemplo, Level 1 es el equivalente de tal en IELTS y en TOEFL es
Sí.
esa nota, etcétera. Entonces, y
Ujú.
puedo guiarles también si me
Ah,
quieren
súper bien.
escribir.
Maravilloso. Bien. Por aquí nos dicen, ¿hay becas o apoyos para las personas que pertenezcan a algún UCL team, digamos como una selección deportiva?
Según yo creo que no. Yo creo que no, pero podría verificar. Es una buena pregunta y no es la primera pregunta de ese tipo que he recibido, pero voy a preguntar si hay, por ejemplo, becas en ese tipo en deportes, por ejemplo,
Ujú.
para atletas élites. Si me quieren escribir directamente, podemos estar en contacto y yo puedo darle seguimiento con el mismo departamento de sports, digamos.
Perfecto. Gracias, Emma. Y por aquí la última pregunta. ¿Existe posibilidad de pathway?
Pathway, ¿en qué sentido o foundation? Eso quiere
Ujú.
decir antes de hacer una licenciatura,
Así es.
después del colegio. del
Sí, yo.
bachillerato.
Sí,
Sí
es un...
tenemos eso es la pregunta, sí.
Ujú,
Sí, UCL tiene su propio pathway, se llama
ok,
UCL Preparatory Certificate, y esos son para estudiantes que hayan hecho el bachillerato en Colombia. Hay varios colegios, varias escuelas en Colombia que ofrecen, o escuelas internacionales que ofrecen el bachillerato. Hay otros que ofrecen el bachillerato internacional. El certificado de UCL es para esos estudiantes de los colegios de las escuelas que no ofrecen bachillerato internacional. Es solo para estudiantes que hayan estudiado bachillerato, pero sí hay oportunidades. Y
maravilloso, bueno, Emma. Ujú,
mientras tanto, podría poner el link de esa, porque es otro equipo que se encarga del
ok,
Preparatory Certificate. Mi colega Martin es el encargado.
listo,
Um,
maravilloso. Bueno, Emma, y mientras tú nos ayudas colocando este enlace en el chat, te quiero agradecer una vez más por tu tiempo y por, como siempre, tu buena disposición. Esta presentación fue demasiado productiva, entonces te agradecemos enormemente. A todos los asistentes, una vez más, los invito a que se contacten directamente con Emma. El correo de Emma está en el chat. Es e.palfreeman@ucl.ac.uk. Entonces, la idea es que todos se puedan contactar con ella para solucionar la mayoría de inquietudes. Lastimosamente, en este espacio no las alcanzamos a cubrir en su totalidad, pero sé que ella con mucho gusto los podrá ayudar en todo el proceso. Así que a todos, mil gracias y Emma, a ti, que tengas un
a
excelente día y
ustedes, Karen, sí. A
ajá, que
todos, sí,
tengamos
que
más
pasen muy
oportunidades.
buen día. Y ojalá nos conozcamos o allá en Bogotá o en Colombia,
Mm,
en cualquier ciudad, o en Londres también. Están cordialmente bienvenidos.
así es, Emma, mil gracias. Feliz día para
Gracias a
ti.
ustedes. Igualmente.
Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.